Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game So today I got a fun, unexpected, and exciting episode for you guys this evening because we're taking a look at Mario Kart 64. Sure, Mario Kart World is all the rage these days, but we got a very glitchy, not full speed version of Mario Kart here right now, and that is because this is running on the Sega Dreamcast, not on Nintendo 64. And it really feels like the early days of Mr. FPGA Nintendo 64 core testing when we'd have Mario Kart running at like 4 frames per second with a ton of glitches. This is courtesy of JNMartin. He is working on a port from the decompilation of Mario Kart 64 to the Sega Dreamcast. Obviously, this is still very early. It's a work in progress build and not available to the public. And big thanks to Falco Gurgis for sending me over this test footage so I could talk about it in video form. But if we move over to real Nintendo 64 captures, or in this instance, Mr. FPGA, obviously this is what Mario Kart is supposed to look like. But the fun part about porting from something, especially decompilation, is it is a process. You're never going to see it work 100% perfectly the first couple times around, but according to Falco, JNMartin has been working on this port for all of 3 weeks, and this is an insane amount of progress out of 3 weeks worth of work. You can obviously tell this is Mario Kart 64. The graphics are maybe like 80% of the way there. Definitely isn't running at full speed yet, and the HUD has some corruption issues, but as a proof of concept, this is some of the wildest stuff you will see, and that is why decompilation projects are so important and so fun. It's not just that you could port it to PC with a modern environment, getting something like 120 frames per second and widescreen support. You can bring it to something like Sega Dreamcast, and if you're wondering why anyone would do this, the real answer is why not, because it's fun and we love to see stuff like this on the channel. And pretty much every single time I talk about Nintendo 64 decompilation projects, I get a ton of questions in the comments basically saying Dreamcast when, and obviously that is in progress because we're seeing footage of Mario Kart 64 running on Dreamcast, and obviously I'm using a little bit of actual hardware capture here just to compare and contrast how far along the port is for 3 weeks. Sure, it definitely is slow, it definitely is buggy, but 3 weeks is basically no time whatsoever in a project like this. So JNMartin's definitely getting this thing stood up and running very quickly, and I can't wait to see when it is available for people to test, because there's definitely a situation where Dreamcast does what Nintendo don't, even if obviously this game does run on Nintendo 64 hardware. So if you take a look at the same course running on Dreamcast, you're going to see that obviously the textures are not in the correct place and it isn't running at full speed. And I'm not saying these are easy solutions to fix whatsoever. What I'm saying is the fact that this is executing on native Sega Dreamcast hardware is impressive in its own right, because if you know anything about the Nintendo 64 codebase and hardware with that MIP CPU and the SGI 3D elements, you're going to realize that it has absolutely nothing in common with the Sega Dreamcast, where they're using a Hitachi SH4 processor with that PowerVR GPU on board. So this is not easy to get that decompiled code ported over to something like Dreamcast, but obviously JNMartin is on the right track here because it is executing, it is running, and even if it isn't perfect, as a proof of concept and a progress report, it is absolutely outstanding. And even though I'm sure most of us are playing Mario Kart World right now, myself included on the Switch too, this is just as exciting for me because I'm an absolute huge Sega Dreamcast fan, as I'm sure most of you are. Leave me a comment down below and you tell me if there was another Nintendo 64 game ported to Dreamcast, which one would you like to see? For me, Bomberman Hero is always at the top just because I love that game and I'd love no reason other than to play it on Dreamcast. You'll definitely see that there is a lot of graphical corruption, but it still looks and feels like Mario Kart 64. And if we move back over to actual Nintendo 64 hardware, you're going to see that this is what it should look like. But the nice thing is there is going to be the room for technical improvements on Dreamcast, including a higher resolution out per Falco Gurgis on Twitter. There might even be room for more innovations or an even better frame rate, but of course obviously right now it is still the early days, so we'll have to wait and see exactly what comes out when this actually gets buttoned up. And as far as when it's going to be done, don't ask me, I have no idea. Next week, next month, next year, we're just gonna all have to wait and see exactly when this is done. But you can obviously tell that this is Wario Stadium no matter if you're on Nintendo 64 or Dreamcast, and even if it has graphical corruption, it's instantaneously recognizable as the game that it is, and that is the exciting part. This is just the foundational element to get to a perfect port of Mario Kart 64 on Dreamcast. But it's time for an air quote soundtrack sample. Go ahead and listen for 45 seconds. Hope you have fun with this one. I'll be right back with a lot more test footage. mean, obviously that is not music from Mario Kart 64, it is from Sonic Adventure, but I put it in there because Falco actually cut a little teaser for Twitter and used one of the songs from Sonic R, but unfortunately that does pop on YouTube, so I had to replace that. But this game, I hope, has Dreamcast music in it when it actually ends up releasing, and as far as multiplayer support is concerned, it is within the build in and of itself. Obviously it is still a little bit graphical glitchy, but it is getting full resolution on all of the viewports when it is rendering things out, so hopefully when this does get finished up for Dreamcast, you're going to have an even better multiplayer battle mode than you would get on Nintendo 64, because that is the thing. Once this is ported over, it can be better than the Nintendo 64 version, because obviously the Sega Dreamcast has a lot more horsepower under the hood. That's why when you saw JNMartin's port of Wipeout, you could get 100, 200, even sometimes 300 frames out of that when it was running on Dreamcast, and when he did the enhanced version, it was basically a rock solid stable 100 frames per second, which obviously Wipeout never got on its origin platforms. And even going through Rainbow Road here, it's absolutely trippy, and again reminds me a lot of the initial testing we did on the Mr. FPJ N64 core, when you'd have games running when it would be a slideshow, when you didn't even have sprites for the characters in Mario Kart, when they were just black blocks just flying around the screen. It was exciting to see because you knew it meant that something fun was going to be delivered on maybe in 6 months or a year or 18 months. And those are the exact same vibes we're getting here with Mario Kart 64. And again, that's why all these decomp projects are so fun. They just basically give you a code base that then people can go in and work on as far as whatever ports they want to do. We see a lot of it to PC, and I know a lot of you guys have been asking when console ports are coming, and obviously now we have that situation for Mario Kart 64, and that is a ton of fun, because don't get me wrong, I'd love to play Mario Kart 64 on my PC in widescreen with all of the creature comforts we see with other ports like Ocarina of Time or Majora's Mask or even Star Fox 64, but getting these ported to legacy hardware, especially Sega, is fun in its own right, and it really kind of gives you a diverse way to play games. As you move over to Yoshi's Mountain here, again you'll see this is instantaneously recognizable as the course it's supposed to be. It just has some issues with the overall graphics, and it seems like a little bit of the layer priority as well, because those cloud blobs are definitely not supposed to be in the front of the screen. But that really is the challenging part of actually porting these things. The Nintendo 64 code base is completely different than what Dreamcast uses, as would be all of the calls to the hardware, because the Power VR GPU on something like Dreamcast is going to do things a completely different way. So you basically have to change up all of the calls going to that Power VR portion of Dreamcast to be able to actually get it to draw all the graphical elements correctly. It's not like it is today when you have NVIDIA GPUs and AMD GPUs, and all you're really doing is trying to buy price versus horsepower, but every single game looks the same. This was the era where every 3D hardware did its own completely random thing in its own way and gave consoles that look. Because if you think about it, Nintendo 64 has a very definable look, as does the Sega Dreamcast, so trying to get that ported over to the Dreamcast in and of itself is going to be a heavy lift. And you will see here, at least in these examples, the textures just look so much cleaner on Dreamcast than they do on Nintendo 64, and that could definitely be a benefit on this port. Leave me a comment down below and you tell me if there are going to be any enhancements on Dreamcast, which one would you want the most? For me, I think a higher frame rate, so long as it doesn't break the game logic, would be fun, because I can't remember if Mario Kart 64 ties any of its frame rate to the game logic. I know some Nintendo 64 games do, and if you run them at too high of a frame rate, that logic can break and the game can start to glitch out. So if you do know the answer to that, leave me a comment down below. But in some areas here, outside of the little bit of graphical corruption on the sprites, you would be hard pressed to think that this wasn't just something that was almost close to complete. So again, 3 weeks worth of actual work trying to port this thing over to Dreamcast is outstanding, and I'm pretty sure JNMartin isn't doing this 40 hours a week. It probably is a couple hours a day just in their spare time, and that's a ton of fun, because obviously as much as we'd all love to be playing Dreamcast 5 right now and having Sega been successful back in the day, the reality is the Dreamcast was the end of the line for their hardware, so it's up to fans to kind of realize the Dreamcast potential and give us fun new experiences. And if you want to follow along on the progress of this, Falco Gurga seems to post almost every single new Dreamcast innovation on their Twitter. The stuff like the port of Grand Theft Auto and Vice City to Dreamcast, stuff like Mario Kart 64, it is an absolute wealth of information, because there are a ton of people out there working on Dreamcast to give us new experiences, and JNMartin has a port of Mario Kart 64 in the works from the Decompilation project, and that is just absolutely insane. It kind of feels like those playground fights back in the day where people would debate Nintendo versus Sega, but it seems like Sega's going to come out on top in the end again, getting a port of Mario Kart 64 to Dreamcast. But leave me a comment down below if you have any questions. Maybe I can get answers from the developer, but hopefully sometime soon we'll have some new footage of Mario Kart 64 on Dreamcast, and I'm sure it'll be looking a lot better than it does today. But I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.